mute that real quick.
Check 1, 2.
Yes, sir. You know, we have these handhelds here. Unfortunately, you can't just have one here. But the way this works is you're not able to do anything with this. It's got right now. So we'll take care of it with any problems. You've got computers. Do you have any questions?
It's okay, we could proceed only because it would be harder to do the podium because of the
Oh yeah, Clarence is right here. Mm-hmm.
You're looking so.
And then Jim here. All right. Just don't back up.
Got handheld mic right there. They're on. They're ready to go. I've got a mute for the back. Once Dean's done his introduction, I will mute all. So, Jill, you need to speak to this. Okay. Yeah, it's working. Test it. If you have any problem, you test it.
Well, I don't find myself overwhelmed very often, but I will say I am overwhelmed. This is really such a wonderful celebration to have 5 extraordinary individuals who've done so much for the School of International Service and who are in transition this year from their full-time teaching to other opportunities that they are pursuing. And it's wonderful to be able to celebrate all that they've done here and to hear from them about the work that they've done. And I'm just delighted to welcome students, faculty, staff, alumni, both here and then on the live stream. I know that we have a number of alumni in particular who wish they could have been here in person, but who are watching on the live stream, and so very delighted to have them here. I'm Jim Goldgeier, the Dean of the School of International Service, and joining me here on stage, we have Gordon Adams, Ron Fisher, and Clarence Lusane, who are all becoming Professor Emeriti of International Relations. Jim Middleman, who is becoming University Professor Emeritus of International Relations, and Abdulaziz Saeed, Professor Emeritus of International Relations, and Mohammed Saeed Farsi Chair Emeritus of Islamic Peace, all as of August 31st. So congratulations to them. They represent, yes. They represent 121 years of service to American University. We've asked them to talk about what inspired them to pursue their research, what continues to inspire them, to reflect on their careers, on their discipline, and on the research that they've done. So it's meant to be a very substantive endeavor here this afternoon. We will then have some time for Q&A, and what I will remind you before that is we are hoping that the Q&A will really be engaging them with on the substance of what they're discussing. I know that people might wish to get up and give long testimonials, and we all appreciate that, but this really is meant to be an engagement with them as scholars and teachers. And then afterwards, we will head up to the atrium for a reception in their honor. I do want to thank the staff of our International Affairs Research Institute for conceiving of this event and also implementing it. So thanks very much to them. So I'm going to introduce all 5 in alphabetical order and then turn to them for their remarks. Professor Gordon Adams, on the far end, is retiring to take up permanent residence in Maine. Gordon and I worked together for many years at George Washington University before he joined the SIS faculty in 2007, so I was very happy when I came here in 2011 to be reunited with him, and he's really been a model practitioner, teacher, and scholar. Among his many career highlights, Professor Adams served as Associate Director for National Security and International Affairs at the Office of Management and Budget in the White House during the 1990s and was the Senior White House Official for National Security and Foreign Policy Budgets. Before that, he was founder and director of the Defense Budget Project, a nonpartisan research center in Washington, which eventually became the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. Since coming to AU, he's published 2 books, and since 2012, he's written a regular column on defense and foreign policy issues for foreignpolicy.com. He's been a distinguished fellow with the Stimson Center since 2008, and he was a member of the Obama administration's transition team at the Office of Management and Budget in 2008-2009. Professor Ron Fisher has enjoyed a very distinguished career in both Canada and at SIS. He first came to SIS as a visiting professor in 1998-99, and then was appointed professor in 2001, joining our International Peace and Conflict Resolution Program, for which he served as program director from 2007 to 2013. His previous faculty appointments were at the University of Guelph in Ontario, where he led the development of the first graduate program in applied social and community psychology in Canada, and at his alma mater, the University of Saskatchewan, where he led the development of the first doctoral program in applied social psychology. Professor Fisher earned his PhD in social psychology with a minor in international relations at the University of Michigan, which had established the world's first center for research on conflict resolution. He's published 4 books in social psychology and conflict resolution, including Paving the Way, Contributions to Interactive Conflict Resolution to Peacemaking, and he'll be a distinguished scholar in residence at George Mason University in the fall. Professor Clarence Lusane is going to be retiring with the others this summer in order to return to his alma mater, Howard University, as chair of its political science department, and we congratulate him on that appointment and very much look forward to collaborating with him in his new role. Prior to attending graduate school at Howard, Professor Lusane spent many years working as an investigative journalist and then later as a staff member on Capitol Hill. His article, Israeli Arms in Central America, won the prestigious Project Censored First Place Award for Most Censored Story of the Year in 1984. He's published 8 books and dozens of scholarly and popular articles, for which he has received wide acclaim. And he's been a visiting scholar in Japan, France, Brazil, South Korea, and South Africa. Professor Lusane is also winner of the British Council Atlantic Fellowship in Public Policy and is a commissioner on the DC Commission on African American Affairs and a board member of the National Foster Youth Institute. University professor Jim Middleman joined American University in 1992. Previously, he served as assistant and visiting associate professor at Columbia University, professor and dean of the Graduate School of International Studies, what's now the Corbell School at the University of Denver, and professor and dean of the Division of Social Science at Queens College of the City University of New York. And it really warms my heart to see somebody who's gone from being a dean back to being a very active scholar. So I'm keeping that in mind. He's also held teaching and research appointments at universities in Uganda, Mozambique, Japan, Singapore, and South Africa. His research agenda has engaged 4 themes: African politics, international development, global governance, and globalization. And his publications are too numerous for me to list here. But I would mention he's often seen as a pioneer of globalization studies who really has helped shape this growing field. He's received Best Book Awards for his books Capturing Globalization and Hyperconflict. And he's also been a distinguished visiting professor at the National University of Malaysia and a member at the of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton University, and was also named an honorary fellow at the Helsinki Collegium for Advanced Studies. And finally, on the far end, a man that needs no introduction to anyone who's ever been at or to the School of International Service, Professor Abdulaziz Saeed, the longest-serving faculty member at American University, and the first occupant of the endowed Mohammed Saeed Farsi Chair of Islamic Peace. Professor Saeed, as many of you know, began teaching at American University in 1957 and graduated from this university before becoming a professor. He founded our program in international peace and conflict resolution. In addition, his many past and current public service actions have included advising the U.S. Department of State, the Department of Defense, the United Nations, and the White House Committee on the Islamic World. He's helped guide and serves on the board of directors of various international NGOs, including Search for Common Ground, Nonviolence International, the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, and the Al-Hibri Charitable Foundation. He was the first ever recipient of the Al-Hibri Peace Education Prize in 2007. He's actively participated in peace negotiations in the Middle East for more than 50 years and has recently also been advising the Syrian National Council and has long supported democracy in Syria. Professor Said has authored numerous books, including Contemporary Islam and Islam and Peacemaking in the Middle East. His work in the field of peace and conflict resolution leaves a lasting legacy at American University. And to honor this groundbreaking life's work, I am thrilled to report that we've launched the Abdul Aziz Said Fund for Peace and Conflict Resolution, which will support specialized programming, high-level conferences, and faculty and student research in the areas of peace building and conflict resolution. We have already received significant gifts for this fund, which we will be able to use immediately in this area, and we look forward to continuing to grow this fund and thus our work in peace and conflict resolution in the coming years. So again, delighted to have the 5 of them here with us, and with that, turn it over to Gordon to get us started.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate the introduction and the support that you have given me over the last 3 or 4 years that you've been here. I'm very happy to be here and somewhat humbled to be in a panel of people with as long careers and as productive as the other 4 people sitting on this panel with me, because I come to this university and to much of my work in life, as Jim suggested, as a scholar practitioner. In my view, I've always been most comfortable bridging the world of research and the world of policy. So it's something that I've done all my life, and a little bit I want to talk about that relationship, I think, the way that has developed for me over time. A little bit of history here. I think I've always been somebody interested in trying to figure out how things got decided the way they got decided. What, if you will, to use the Wizard of Oz analogy, is behind the curtain. You know, what levers are really being pulled? How are those levers pulled? How do they work with each other? That's been a sort of a fascination. I actually date this back to my very early childhood when I couldn't figure out exactly what it was my parents were intending by the things they were suggesting I do or how I behave. And I discovered the mother lode one day in the basement of our house because I went downstairs and in a cardboard box was a box of Parents Magazine. Now, I don't know if any of you remember Parents Magazine, but it was full of very handy tips about how to raise your children without letting them know you were doing it. And so I started reading it. It was great because I could figure out what was behind the curtain. Now I knew why these things were being said. Right? So that, I think, dug in quite early with me, and I think to some degree some of the intellectual pursuits we all have an element of biography in it. That's the earliest touchstone I can find in my own biography was, what are they doing to me? It doesn't seem to me that it exactly makes sense. What's behind this? And I've been going, what's behind this, basically, ever since. My trajectory is kind of a series of accidents. Many people go one place, stay one place, and they know where they're going when they get there. Not mine. There were many changes. You know, I studied as an undergraduate student abroad in France in 1961. And had to argue and defend the beliefs of a young American for Freedom member, Republican card-carrying young man in French with people who knew a lot more about the United States than I did, much to my shock, though they were French. I mean, my grandmother was a person who thought that FDR was a communist. That's where I was coming from. Right? And so to learn that turned me really into, at the time, a Europeanist with a particular interest in the European-Africa relationship. Strange as that may seem, because it ain't anything that I appear to do now, although in a way, when I close, you will see that it is. Since that time, I have had what I guess I would call a somewhat quixotic relationship with the academy. I am here as a term faculty member, not as a tenured faculty member. What mattered to me probably at every point in my life was the relationship between what I was working on intellectually or in research terms and how it meshed with how one understood what was going on, what was behind the curtain, what explained policy, what was it about, and how might I actually have an impact on policy. So that policy-scholarship relationship went with me the whole time. My curiosity about the public world was the first step in my somewhat quixotic relationship with the academy. I was fired from my first academic job. The secret is out now. This was 1970. The United States had just chosen to invade Cambodia, and students were occupying buildings on the Columbia University campus, where I was a young assistant professor. And as somebody who thought both that the war in Vietnam was absurd, and as somebody who thought the students' action was somewhat justified, if not explainable, I was speaking on platforms outside the buildings that were occupied by students. 2 years later, the senior member of the political science faculty explained to me that I could have my 6 years up or out in the academy the way other assistant professors got, but in my case, it would definitely be out. So at that point, I decided I would leave the academy, and I did. And went into, it was in a way the best kick in the pants I ever got, because I went into first to the Social Science Research Council, and to the Council on Foreign Relations, then did a little part-time teaching and started doing some writing, and got into the defense arena by the back door. I was not originally somebody, though I had a degree in international relations, who really was deep there. I was working on the European Union and its policy making and its African associates and things like that. But because I felt there needed to be a relationship between my scholarship and policy, I migrated via the study of the defense industry. So I didn't start out as a defense policy and hardware wonk. I started out as an industry wonk. And my first work, my first book, was in fact on, I guess, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, but since Eisenhower consciously left the Congress out of his description in his 1961 farewell address because he didn't want to disturb his allies in the Congress, I described it as the Iron Triangle, which was the triangular relationship between the key committees in the Congress working on defense issues, the policy making being done in the Department of Defense, and the industry and the economic interests that were involved in the defense business. When I proposed to write that book, as I was reaching a finishing point, I went out to meet with the dean of the University College where I was teaching at Rutgers in the late 1970s, and the chair of my department. And I told him I wanted to take a semester's leave to finish the book. My chair of the department, more quixotic relationship, turned to me and said, "You know that book is not going to qualify you for tenure." I said, "I know, but it's the book I want to write." So I left the university again and wrote this book, The Iron Triangle, which did rather well in its day, actually. Still sort of hangs around the intellectual universe. And that led me into, again, following my nose, into an interest in doing what E.E. Schattschneider, great political science of some years ago, wrote in a book called The Semi-Sovereign People, Widening the Arena of Conflict. His view was this was the way you escalated and widened the opportunities and options in a decision. You did it by escalating and by widening the number of players in the conflict arena. It's a brilliant book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it to you. It's very old, but it's a great book. I figured that not enough people understood the defense budget, including me. So I went out into the intellectual universe and came down to Washington, D.C. with $135,000, which sounds like a lot of money, except it was supposed to support me, a research assistant, and a part-time support person in a new think tank that we were setting up called the Defense Budget Project. So I created the Defense Budget Project and spent 10 years deeply engrossed in the world of understanding the defense budget and putting out reports and chapters and books and articles and all kinds of things about that and disseminating them as widely as possible. Because for me, what I was working on intellectually didn't have the satisfaction I wanted it to have unless it was connected to the world of policy, which has always been true. After working as a frustrated Democrat on the presidential campaign staff for issues 1980, 1984, 1988, you remember Mike Dukakis, surely. All right, the ride in the tank, the helmet.
That was your idea?
Yeah. Worse than that, Jim, it was not only not our idea, the defense issue staff warned Dukakis not to do it. And the policy staff said, "Oh, it's a great visual." It sure was, but not for Dukakis. Right. Well, 1992, I finally captured the brass ring because Bill Clinton was elected to the White House and I'd worked on the campaign issues staff. So I figured the one experience I hadn't had was actually working in government. What would that be like? What would I have to do when I put, as I used to like to say, my mouth where the taxpayers' money was, right, on defense? So I went into the White House, and lo and behold, where most people go into the White House and figure, or into the government in general, and figure they're going to spend capital they've already built up, they won't have time to acquire new capital. In my case, it was exactly the opposite, because the real blessing of working in, for 5 years at the Office of Management and Budget as the White House budget guy for national security was I had not only defense, I had intelligence, and I had foreign policy, foreign assistance and diplomacy. All of those funds came across my desk. So in 5 years, I got a fire hose baptism in foreign policy budgeting in the United States, a subject about which I knew nada, absolutely nothing at the time. So I got an immense amount of capital, and I learned some basic things about working in government too. First off, working in those reaches in government is somewhat like what Ted Williams said about baseball. You win losing 70% of the time. What that means is if you're a batter and you hit 3 out of 10, you're in the Hall of Fame probably over your career. But you've lost 7 out of the 10 times that you've been up at bat. Lost a lot of them. Learn how to lose. Very important to learn how to lose in life. Secondly, I learned that unless you drive a silver stake through something you want to kill, beware. It'll come back and bite you. Right? We were talking with Mike Schroeder about this earlier today. I'll never forget the day that a National Security Council legislative guy comes bustling into my office with a memorandum of talking points that the president has been using, and there was a left-handed tick beside a particular talking point, and that meant that the president had used those talking points because he was left-handed and the tick always went in the opposite direction. What he'd said to the staffer was he'd just finished talking with Senator Inouye, and Senator Inouye wanted to know why this nerdy propeller head at the Office of Management and Budget was standing in the way of a perfect solution that he had for funding programs for the former Soviet Union. Right? It was a ridiculously bad idea, and I thought I'd killed it. Not when the president comes back with a left-handed tick. It captures your attention. So I had to kill it a second time. But I learned, if you want it dead, better put the silver stake through its heart at the beginning. And third, I learned, which is really quite surprising, nothing is linear in policy discussions in government. Nothing is linear. If you sit at the table, you expect to go, as most of us in the academic world do, from point A to point B to point C to point D, and nicely arrive at a policy conclusion, ain't the way it works in the real world. The discussion goes all over the map, and each party is bringing a particular way of focusing it to his or her point of view, and you better be prepared for the shift as you go through the policy discussion. Nothing is linear. The fourth thing I learned because I realized I'd learned when Professor Brenner, it's back here, Professor Brenner came into the old executive office building. I don't know if you remember, Phil, but you came in with a class, and I gave a talk to a class of yours from American University. And at the end of my little talk, Phil asked me, he said, you're a political scientist, what's the one thing that surprised you most in government when you went into government? And had an instantaneous reaction. No, I didn't have to think about it. The power of personality. That personality is who you are, how you present, how you argue, how you deliver, how you relate to other people is absolutely critical sometimes in the way policy outcome is shaped. I hadn't been aware of that. It was totally new to me. So I spent that time in government, but one of the things that it led me to was, if you will, the intellectual and research interests that I've been pursuing ever since. Because I got that crash education in foreign policy, I also became very interested in the balance between the civilian foreign policy institutions and the Department of Defense. Not something I had been aware of before because I knew nothing about the civilian foreign policy institutions. So having acquired that knowledge, hands-on in great detail over a 5-year period, and it was intense, what I dedicated my sort of intellectual pursuit to ever after was, what is that balance about? Why is it balanced the way it is? And what are the upsides and downsides of what looked to me like an increasing militarization of American foreign policy? which is a subject I would probably not have done had I not worked at the Office of Management and Budget. So the relationship back and forth for me is critical, and it led me directly to two things. One is to write a textbook, I think there's a copy outside, called Buying National Security, which is the only book in existence that actually describes how we buy and pay for not only defense, but foreign policy and intelligence, and how the White House works and how the Congress works across the range of all of our international engagements. I felt people ought to know what I'd learned. And teaching with great pleasure here at American University and previously at GW, a class in that subject, which is probably, I think, unique in the United States in any school that has that range of coverage in it. And the other was to pursue this question of balance and militarization, which is the other book that Professor Murray, is Shun here? I don't know where she is. Shun Murray and I co-edited that came out last year on mission creep, on the balance of the institutions and on the implications of that balance of institutions for American foreign policy, for our national security, for the way the government functions. So I have continued to pursue that and with great pleasure teach it here at American University. In fact, this semester I taught with great pleasure an undergraduate honors colloquium on the militarization of U.S. foreign policy. Lucky them, they had to read the book. Right? That's what you get to do, right? Well, I hope they read the book. But you're right, Anthony. You never know for sure, right? So where am I going with this now? That is a continuation now of my intellectual pursuit. As I sit this summer in my kayak in the middle of the ocean in Maine, you can bet that aside from enjoying the scenery, somewhere I'm going to be thinking about the balance of the institutions of government and continue to write on the subject when I can speak on the subject. And I am especially interested in that subject in the context of what I see as how the powers in the world today are relating to each other in a world where power relationships are clearly rebalancing. And how nations adjust to that, particularly this one, is going to be a critical determinant of the next 10 or 20 years of global history. And one of the elements in that is the element that I'm interested in, which is the balance of these institutions, and whether by overemphasizing our military power and our military dominance, which is true, we shoot ourselves in the foot in terms of managing those relationships long term. So that is something, I call it neo-realism, that I am going to continue to work on. Rest assured, however, that I have not forsaken my other career. I am an actor. Some people know, some people don't know, but I am. So for those of you, anybody coming to Maine this summer? Some hands, yeah?
Oh.
Few hands. Between July 15th and August 16th, come to either Bath or Camden, Maine, and you will see me in productions of Macbeth and Midsummer Night's Dream with the Bath Shakespeare Festival. So I'll get the chance to do more of that too. Thank you.
Very nice. Yeah, that's really nice.
For a man who's done a lot of practice, you really put the conceptual stuff together too, and that's what it's all about. Thank you. Welcome the opportunity, Jim, for this. And thank you all for coming. Nice to see some friends and colleagues and others in the audience. Jim mentioned that I will be a distinguished visiting scholar at George Mason University in the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. Good colleague Chris Mitchell is here. I'll be working with him. But the distinguished has always bothered me because it seems to me that soon after that label, another one follows, and it's called extinguished. And I'm going to try and keep that outcome away as long as I can. Believe me, Carol and I are shifting at the end of this year back to our native Canada, but a little farther west to the California, Canada, and Victoria. And looking forward to that and appreciating all of the interactions and contributions and achievements that have happened here for me in the last 15 years. My field, as Jim mentioned, is social psychology. It is interested generally in human behavior in a social context. I'm particularly interested in applied social psychology, so I resonate with a number of the things Gordon said. I define that as the theory, research, and practice on social problems And the big 3P that have been identified in that subfield are peace, poverty, and prejudice. And I wrote a text in 1982, which some say influenced the field, but never went into a second edition because it was a little too radical, I think, for the mainstream of social cognition stuff. And as Jim mentioned, spent a lot of time developing grad programs to train young social psychologists, social scientists, to be able to do things out in that so-called real world, as opposed to the laboratory or handing out questionnaires to introductory psychology students, trying basically to make a difference. So I guess it's no surprise that I was attracted to the study of conflict analysis and resolution, and primarily at the intergroup level and the international level, especially what we call ethno-political conflict. And I and others in the field, Dean Pruitt is here today, one of the pioneers in that crossover, have tried to articulate what that interdiscipline of sociology and psychology can bring to international relations. And if you look at the history of the last 40, 50 years, there's been an awful lot of useful transfer in areas of perceptions, attitudes, group processes, intergroup relations, and so on. And I tried to capture a fair amount of that in my 1990 book that is sitting out there with a long, awkward title, The Social Psychology of Intergroup and International Conflict Resolution. Who would buy that, you know? Anyway, attempted to bring stuff through, and it was actually one of the first books that talked about the importance of social identity, which was still a relatively new theory in social psychology. And now you pick up any book, right, in IR at the intersection, certainly conflict resolution, identity-based conflict has come into its own. Many contributions to international relations, challenging the rational decision-making model way back when, providing alternatives today, such as prospect theory. A lot of study on international images during the Cold War, for example. Causal attribution, you know, how do policymakers make attributions about the behavior, the reasons for the behavior of the other party. As you know, in escalated conflict, they're usually negative, right? And then they operate out of that worst case scenario. May not get you to cooperative interaction. Groupthink was quite a contribution to decision making, the drive for consensus seeking in a kind of relatively homogeneous, intact group that's so worried about protecting its image and making the decision the leader really wants, and so on. Conflict escalation, Dean Pruitt again and other people in social psychology brought awareness to the stages of escalation that destructive conflict goes through. Not alone, Quincy Wright in International Relations did years ago. People have written about entrapment in conflict, the idea that parties make so many investments that they're then not willing to change their course of action, so they will, you know, beat the dead horse, so to speak, to the point of mutual destruction. The study of nationalism comes to some degree out of social psychology. I actually did my master's thesis on ethnocentrism, the tendency for people to be ethnically centered, to be glorifying and loyal to their own groups, but denigrating and being discriminatory toward outgroups, kind of a generalized prejudice, which may still be with us to some degree. But all of that is kind of conceptual, theoretical stuff. One reason I was so happy to come to AU and to SIS is because I'm a practitioner. I do things as well out of the theory base and using research to evaluate what we do and so on. So when AU said, ideas into action, action into service, hey, music to my ears. You don't hear that as much today, but the School of International Service embodies that, and I hope carries it forward. So you do something with the knowledge that is generated in practice or in policy making. Got to tell you though, all of the thousands of hours I've put into practice as a conflict resolution trainer, a dialogue facilitator, a moderator of problem-solving workshops, never really helped me get to full prof. You know, people say, that's nice, Rod. You should go out there and make some speeches too and bring visibility. But you know, when it comes time for, you know, that decision about promotion, even for tenure, it's the underlining in your vita that counts. It's those journal articles, it's those books and so on. I didn't resent that because I basically exploited academia. to do my practice, to do the things I cared about. So I'm very thankful as opposed to critical. I did develop a model for what I called third-party consultation. It was the lead article of my dissertation at Michigan in 1972. And I'm reminded of a joke that a good friend and sometimes colleague, Herbert Kellman, well known in the field of social psychology and conflict resolution, jokes about. He says, you want to be successful, write a good article and keep publishing it. I have published that model at least 7 times in different places. But of course you augment it and you elaborate it or whatever. A thing happened for me, an important event in about 1990. I was a research officer at the now sadly defunct Canadian Institute for International Peace and Security, which was a sister creation of the United States Institute of Peace. Jeff Helsing is here today and knows that history. Unfortunately, a conservative government came in and said, Canada doesn't need an Institute for Peace and Security. We know how to do those things. We have foreign affairs. And so that was the end of it, sadly so. But anyway, I got invited to this conference of dialogue facilitators, so-called at the time. And it turned out they were the leading scholar practitioners and practitioners in the field of conflict resolution. And the field was looking, the subfield of working with people in dialogue and workshops in analysis and problem solving, trying to find a label for what it was doing, trying to define itself. So I was kind of the new kid on the block, not that new, I mean I was in my 50s, and I volunteered, say, I'll do that. So I wrote this concept paper and it went back out to all of the illustrious folks who were there, very well established, and some mid-career folks as well. And I didn't get many responses, but it was kind of like, well, I guess no response is yes. So I took the term interactive conflict resolution, and I've been publishing it and peddling it ever since. But everyone else at the conference who already had a term for the kind of work they were doing continued to use that term, right? But I have to say, I'm very pleased today, the creator who won the terminological competition using the term Track 2 diplomacy, Joe Montville, is here today. So I congratulate you, Joe. I wrote the failed paper, but people in the State Department, they don't say interactive conflict resolution. Too much of a mouthful. They say Track 2 diplomacy, and we value that. So that was important. I documented the field in the 97 book that's out there, and Jim mentioned the contributions to peacemaking. Comparative case analysis, 9 cases, more have been done. We really believe that looking at the subjective side of conflict, having influentials interact together, getting a mutual analysis, starting to look for directions for peace building, not negotiating, just, kind of creating options, as Roger Fisher was big on. I always joke my Uncle Roger made great contributions, and that was one of them, facilitated brainstorming in negotiations. That can be a valuable thing. But it's very difficult work to get approval, to get funding, but it can influence the subjective factors of people who take part, and then the big challenge is, does it transfer to policy making? And that's where things become more difficult. But all of that is technical, and we try to make the case in the field of peace and conflict resolution that we're not just a social science subdiscipline, we're a social movement. We came out of the peace studies movement, the anti-war movements, and so on and so on. And that in some ways distinguishes from some other social science endeavors and orientations that are out there. What social psychology and the humanities in general bring to this study is the human side of conflict resolution and international relations, and not to forget that. And peace studies, conflict resolution, but more so peace studies, brings the moral questions about, is violence ever justified? Or if it is, when is it? Can we go as far as responsibility to protect? Or should we say no to violence because it begets violence, as you probably know? And we talk about things like the importance of participation and empowerment. And I think the field really is vested in the crucible of democratic values for those kinds of things. And a long time ago, more recognized in the last 20 and 30 years, a visionary by the name of Mary Parker Follett, working as a scholar practitioner in the early 1900s, made the distinction between power over versus power with. And she was an advocate for power with, which was picked up as one of the mantras of the feminist movement, as you may be aware. And that's now kind of got a weak reflection in soft versus hard power in the field of international relations, and only took about 90 years for Mary's concept to make it that far. Anyway, by way of conclusion, what can I say? It seems like a time like this you should say something profound, but I've never been accused of that, so this is difficult for me. But I will say time, authenticity, relevance are three of the most precious commodities that we have to work with. And I'll leave people with a question. Whatever field you're in, I leave you with the question, are we problem solvers or are we pendulum pushers? I often say to my students, every field is dictated to a degree by fashion, by fads if you want a more negative term. What comes into vogue? And most people jump on the bandwagon and they invest the resources, away we go. And it can be obviously contributive. But are we focusing on the essential problems of human endeavor and the human challenge? That's the question that I ask. But I'm very thankful for the opportunities that I've had here. They go beyond SIS. I mean, yes, I helped build on the foundation, my dear friend and colleague, a leading edge graduate program. And we did a lot of that, and we still do, with interactive teaching. But it's starting to become less of a fashion now. Used to be in the strategic plan. Not sure it is anymore, right? We may be sliding back to, I lecture, you listen. That's called education, right? Trying to put my notes here. Ah, yes. To work with a number of innovative organizations in Washington. And one big change there is not just more the NGO community, represented well by the Alliance for Peace Building, some people here, Rach Gregorian, one of the founders, but by changes in government, developments in the State Department, USAP I mentioned, USAID, Office of Conflict Mitigation and Management, State Department, our colleague Chuck Call just spent 2 years there. Ideas are moving into practice and to policy in a systems context, because I know whatever any particular discipline brings is only a small part of that picture. And so in a systems approach, you look for contributions from all around. And finally, the thing I'll say that I'm thankful for, that I couldn't read before, is the opportunity to be in a community of caring and very capable professionals. That's what SIS has been for me, and I'm most appreciative.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, let me say I think this is a great idea. I wish we had done this more over the years. To have the opportunity to hear our colleagues discuss their work, the genesis for their work, and how it relates to building SIS and building American University, not just as an intellectual community, but as a community that's engaged. What I want to talk about is not just my work, but what is the motivation for that work. Over the years, I've been asked many times, when did I first become interested in social justice or racial justice issues? And I've never had a straightforward answer. And that's because as far back as I can remember, these were always issues in my life. These were issues we discussed at the dinner table, we discussed in the yard. My grandmother, who lived in Bessemer, Alabama, which is right outside of Birmingham, Alabama, was very active in the civil rights movement. She referred to it as the situation. So often when we were down as children, back in the end of the 50s, early 1960s, and my mother and my father and my grandmother, they would talk, they would use language to try to protect us from some of the really horrific things they were dealing with, but we figured it out. And so we knew pretty early on that you had to be engaged, you had to address issues. My grandmother worked with Dr. King, she worked with Jesse Jackson, she worked with Fred Shuttlesworth, she was on the Pettus Bridge for some of those demonstrations. She helped to organize the 1963 children's protest that took place in Birmingham. So she was a very influential individual just in our family overall. And so, I could not remember a time when I did not think about the work she did and her efforts. So that was really kind of an incubator. But what was really kind of game-changing for me was in 1967 when there was an urban uprising in Detroit, what they call race riots, but was really an uprising. And on the second, and it began not that far from where I lived, and on the second night of that event, both my mother and my sister were shot. Fortunately, they both survived, but as you can imagine, it was an extremely traumatizing experience for a young child. And I witnessed the shooting. And fortunately, coming out of that experience, there was a broad effort to create circumstances where young people in particular would not just be on the streets, but would be involved in the community. So they built community centers, they built recreation halls, and this was critical for me because one of the things that they did was to create a rec center near my home, and they paid us to come every week. And one of the things I became involved with was putting out a newsletter. This was back when the old mimeograph machines, some of you guys remember that. And that's where I really learned to write. It wasn't in elementary school, it wasn't junior high, where I really learned to write with a purpose. Writing where it had some meaning was really in that circumstance. And so we began to put out weekly community newsletters that talked about things that were going on in the neighborhood, some related to policing, some related to issues around poverty and welfare, some related to many of the Vietnam War that was unfolding at the time. So that's where I really began to see the power of the word and the importance of documenting and articulating and arguing for a point of view. And that had to be a critical part of any kind of activism that happened. Now, my road to academia was long and winding, as Jim indicated. And in fact, I did not go back to graduate school until about 15, 16 years after I finished undergraduate. But I spent much of that time, as indicated, as an investigative reporter, and not only covering issues in the U.S., but in Panama and South Africa and Zimbabwe and many places around the world. At one point, I headed up an organization called the Third World Journalists, and it was an organization made up of people of color, journalists in the U.S. who covered issues around the world. And that was important because there had been little opportunity for journalists of color, whether they worked for the major media or if they worked as independents, to have those opportunities. So the reason we put together that organization was to give people the space where they could have contacts with other journalists and people who were doing research around the world. And so that also began to shape my global view. Now, at some point, it was recommended that perhaps I should go back to graduate school. That perhaps I should get a grounding in the areas that I'm interested in, not just from a journalistic perspective or a public policy perspective, but from a scholarly perspective. And to go and to try to get a sense of what has been written, what has been said, what are the fields that are relatively that are interested in the things that I'm interested in. And so I, under the advice of Dr. Ron Walters, who was chair of the political science department at Howard University, I went back to Howard. And of the 6 fields of the different fields that existed in political science, I decided to concentrate on international relations and black politics. And at the time, I did not know that that was not something anyone did, because those were seen as separate spheres. People who did black politics tended to do American politics or urban politics. People who did international relations tended to do comparative. But I said, these things seem to fit. And to his credit, Dr. Walters says, okay, you can go with this. And I only found out later that in the history of Howard University Political Science, I was the only one who did that. But it struck me as natural. Of course they go together. Of course these two fields should relate. And I fortunately had great training under Dr. Walters, not only in the literature and the debates within those fields, but in the way in which Dr. Walters was an active and engaged scholar, not only at the local level and the national level, but at the international level as well. And in many ways, he is my scholar father. Relations with your father are often challenging in that you want to emulate, but you also want to strike out on your own. And much of what I've done is trying to have that balance. But it's been great. And what I've tried to do in my work is to be at that nexus of race relations and international relations, fed by historical context. And as I've written about anything, I've always tried to have a historical context as a setting for understanding contemporary public policy. Now, the other thing that's shaped, that I think has defined a lot of the work I've done, especially with the books, is that I like to tell stories. And I would like to say, the ideas for these books, came to me one night. I was up thinking, and I had, some brilliant reflection and sat down. That's not what happened. For pretty much every single book, it began as a story. It began as some kind of engagement or encounter. When I wrote the book on Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, that came out of a luncheon that I had with a Guardian reporter, Gary Young, who raised the issue of whether or not the elevation of Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice into the strategic center of U.S. foreign policy making changed the narrative of how African Americans were perceived globally. And that just struck me as, yeah, that is an interesting question. Let me investigate. The book I wrote on Hitler's black victims came out of a party I was at in London, and there were 3 young people. This was in 1991. 3 young Afro-Germans who had come over after the wall had come down. They had been on the east. And I asked them, where did you guys come from? Why are you guys Afro-Germans? And they said, actually, we do not know. And so that initiated me beginning to investigate the history of black people in Germany. And then, of course, particularly looking at what happened during the Nazi period, right? And so that opened up the door for that. And pretty much all of the books came out of stories like that. The book on Pipe Dream Blues came out of experience when I was working on Capitol Hill. One of the areas I covered was drug policy, and I became very familiar with a lot of the local drug police, people who went undercover. And they would occasionally let me go undercover with them. My wife didn't appreciate that, but it was a way to get to the ground level of how policing kind of actually operated and what these guys kind of went through. And I also spent a lot of time with people who were doing work around addiction and working with those communities as well. But out of that, there were just so many stories of the experiences of particularly young black women who were being impacted by these drug policies. And again, that opened up the door, and for me, immediately began to look at, not only the historical side, but what's the international side? How do all of these different things kind of relate? And then lastly, the Black History of the White House came out of my travels during 2007, 2008, as I went to Brazil and to China and to England and to France and places, and was bombarded with questions from people about what would it mean to have an African American in the White House? How would that affect U.S. domestic policy? How would it affect U.S. foreign policy? Would Obama change the name of the White House, which is one of the questions that came up. So, all of these kinds of, inquiries prompted me to begin to do that kind of research. So, over the years, I've tried to evolve in looking at this relationship between race, foreign policy, domestic policy, and then as both Gary and Ron talk about, public policy. And how does understanding those intersections help us to develop and craft public policy that actually is useful, that actually is productive. And so I've tried to do that both through scholarship, but also through placing myself in positions where I really have to engage people who are trying to struggle around these issues with all the complexities. So as the Dean mentioned, I'm on the DC Commission on African American Affairs, which was initiated in the city to address the transformation that's going on as a result of gentrification and economic development in the city. This is a critical issue. It's impacting people across the city in very profound kinds of ways. In some ways that are good, in many ways that are not so good. And so again, those are the kinds of experiences that I try to elevate into the research and the writing that I do. A couple of things I mentioned about the writing. I've also tried to write in ways in which the language was accessible. This has struck me as extremely critical as there are there's lots and lots of good literature in my field, but much of it is not accessible in the sense of if you're not in the game, you kind of don't really know, what people are talking about. And then you miss a broad audience of constituencies that you really want to be engaged in the debate and in the dialogue. As I thought about this presentation, there were a few regrets that began to pop up. One was that I felt I have not used as much culture in my writings as perhaps I should have, or I would like to. In other words, using works from literature, plays, novels, music. It's peppered through much of my work, and pretty much anything I write, I try to find an excuse to talk about jazz. So, I talk about jazz in the White House, jazz during the Nazi period, jazz with Condoleezza Colin Powell. So I throw it in there, but there's a lot more that I should be. I felt that over the years that I should have brought into the work, and particularly the last few years, I've been looking at science fiction. And use some of that in my class. There's some really good social justice science fiction that's evolved, and I want to use more of that moving forward. Also, more collaborative work. Many of us, scholars, it's a lonely deal. You sit, you write, you edit, you send it off, get feedback, and you kind of go forward. And you don't end up doing a lot of exchange until after something is published, and then you're giving talks about it and discussions. But I wish I had, and I plan to do more collaborative, not only with colleagues, but also with graduate students and other students. And I think, that's not just good for us, but certainly it's good for them as well. Lastly, I would say my 18 years at American University have been extremely fruitful. I think that I've grown in part because of my relations with my colleagues, reading their works, having discussions, being engaged on everything from faculty searches to other issues that have come up, have all been done in very collegial ways, in which even when there were differences, those differences were never an obstacle to us moving forward. And that simply does not exist in many universities or many institutions. So I think I was very fortunate to be at AU during this period. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I turn to Jim, I just want to mention that he will be remaining with us as Distinguished Scholar in Residence, so I'm delighted for that. And also, I should acknowledge that the person who hired the first 4 of our speakers is my predecessor, Lou Goodman, so congratulate him on his wise decision-making. Please.
For me, shuffling away from full-time teaching is a bittersweet occasion. But as Jim said, SIS will kindly allow me to loiter here. I'll be University Professor Emeritus. I was often curious about this word emeritus. I think it means without merit anymore.
No, come on.
So I'm becoming emeritus. I'm extremely proud to be part of the 2015 graduating class. It makes me think back to my first university commencement, which was in 1966. If memory serves, President John F. Kennedy had been scheduled to speak that day. After his assassination, Vice President Hubert Humphrey delivered the commencement address, which was held outdoors in the Midwest. The temperature that June afternoon soared to 100 degrees. The platform party and students were, of course, dressed in dark robes. Nevertheless, Mr. Humphrey lived up to his reputation for giving seemingly never-ending speeches. Even the sirens of ambulances coming for some of the elderly growing faint did not deter him. He droned on and on. I don't remember a word that he said that day. Do not worry, I will try to be brief. My journey bridges the personal and the professional. My wife, Linda, my son, Jordan, are here with me today. Our daughters, Sasha and Alicia, are at work in the educational community in Colorado where they live. On the professional side, thanks to the institutions that have tolerated me, AU has been my home for 23 of 44 years in my career to this point. I owe a debt of gratitude to my own professors. Some of them have been great role models to me. My kindred spirits, my fellow travelers, are here in this room. I could name a number of people. And my students and former students have become my teachers. They are a source of inspiration. And I'd like to cite one message that I received. I'll read just a few sentences to you. 2 or 3 years ago, I opened an email, and the email began, "I'm certain you don't remember me. I attended a contemporary civilization course that you taught at Columbia University in 1979. It has colored my perspective ever since. After my undergraduate, I went on to do a PhD in biology, and I am currently the head of a lab at NIH. I'll read the last 2 sentences. I still recall the 2 quotes on the board the first day of class. This is some 30 years after the fact. The owl of Minerva spreads its wings only at the coming of the dusk. Who is the author? This is an exam question. Hegel, yes. Hegel, you can only know after the fact. You look back, it's ideas that move history. You can only know them historically. The philosophers interpreted history. Now we must change it. Marx. So he went on in the email to say that he's been puzzling over this tension ever since. What do we do? Is it ideas? Is it material forces? How do they interact with one another? And we spent a whole semester in class discussing a lot of great issues surrounding that point. And this is what universities are really all about. They're for sparking the mind. They're for loving learning. So I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the path that I have taken. I will abbreviate the narrative and not linger. And I won't do a lot of remembrances. Indeed, one wit declared, "I don't do nostalgia, especially about the past." But memoirs are a fruitful way to explore practice and how practice influences outlook. My career is rooted in two early experiences. Both revolve around social justice. In an undergraduate course on international organization, we studied apartheid. I became shocked at this particular form of systemic racial exclusions, and very soon after, I joined the anti-apartheid movement. This experience later led me to leave the United States and enroll in a university in Uganda, where I lived with students in exile, with refugees, some of whom had been subject to torture and other horrors. In 1971 there, in Uganda, following a military coup, I became witness and had some close calls myself with gruesome acts of violence. My second experience that I'll mention is that I had already joined the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement in the United States. And of course, this intermingled with the civil rights movement in this country. It's very hard to separate them. Faced with the matter of conscience, I was subject to the draft, and I had to say whether I would go and kill in the name of country for a cause that I felt was unjust. What would you do? I thought long and hard about these ethical issues. I did not take them lightly. And I said no. I would not go. I would not kill. At that time, and after living in some of the most marginalized areas of the world, American international relations at our universities failed to resonate with me. The field was too narrow. It was too provincial. The discipline constraining. Long before I read Foucault, I did not want to be disciplined. I thought universities were about creativity. The formation of my intellectual identity came in a series of questions that I have wrestled with. I have grappled with four broad questions, just as one does at a Passover Seder. What are the answers to the four questions? The first question, what strategies are appropriate for jump-starting development in different contexts? This led to books on Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, which tried very different strategies of development. And later a book called Escape from Underdevelopment. The first question soon evolved into a second one at a global level. What rules should be adopted? Whose rules? Who decides? And how? This question has been a natural for me since I have worked off and on for different United Nations agencies. Thirdly, before there was a literature in this field, I began to ask, this was around 1990, and to teach here at SIS, who governs globalization. Is globalization really governable? Or as Anthony Giddens, the former director of LSE, said, is it out of control? These issues pointed to another avenue of inquiry. To explore them, one must look into the production of ideas. How is knowledge implicated in the exercise of power? This requires interrogating conventional wisdom and challenging pre-understandings, not only understandings, but pre-understandings. What is it that unites all of my work then? The answers I have come up to these questions. Uniting all of my work is a concern for marginalized communities and the counterpoints. What is it that keeps marginalized communities down? Think, for example, of what is going on as we sit here right now in Baltimore. And as Clarence said, the uprisings by large swaths of the African American community and their allies. And who doubts that marginalization is, in some cases, one of the chief causes of the radicalization of religion? In my own research, I attempt to insinuate myself in the minds of the powerful and also the powerless. Along the way, I try to engage in critical self-reflection and recognize my own inadequacies. What are my second thoughts about my own work? What would I do differently? Although I am not monolingual, I should have invested more time in learning more languages. Secondly, perhaps I was initially too influenced by certain theories taught in U.S. international relations, which I now regard as ethnocentric and canonical. Thirdly, I bother myself with the question, are there stony silences in my scholarship? Do I have license to represent others? Do I have license to give voice to the marginalized peoples? Am I authorized to tell their stories, to make their voices heard? I would say that all in all, I am very lucky. Being a professor provides space for creativity and expanding critical thinking. Though I know firsthand from my own struggles that academic freedom must be won time and time again. It is not a given. Universities help realize deep fulfillment. They are places that bring pleasure. They blur the lines between play and work. In some, a career as a professor involves soul searching, ruminating about meanings, and looking into one's own values. The rewards are enormous. My career so far has been a great privilege. It has been a series of adventures. I look forward to the adventures to come. Many of them will be with my colleagues here in this room. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Will you use the microphone, please? No, 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 you need.
I have it. It's real, yeah.
Okay.
It's in my pocket.
Okay, all
I
right.
can use it.
I just want to make sure, because people on the live stream
Yeah.
need that.
You can hear me? Good? Good. You can hear me?
I don't know, I don't think,
Okay, I'll hold it. You want me to hold it? No, I can hold it, yeah. Can you hear me?
yeah, I think that's good, thank you.
I grew up at American University. We'll talk about what brings us here. Came to this university crossing the Syrian desert, which in the old days was a great center of civilization, Mesopotamia. And my companions since have been love and fear. At age 6 in Amuda, the town where I grew up in Syria, the Syrians had rebelled against the French, and the French bombed Amuda. Men took up their guns, fighting, and women took their hands off their children to safety. So when I say love and fear, I'm talking about my mother that took us, like many other mothers, to safety. So my wife, Elena, who's present here, Elena Marie, my mother, Shamsa, who is not with us, my grandmother, Maryam, and my sister, Rose, who is not with us. This is the story of my life. It is my sister, Rose, who, as Aleppo, because my background has been moving from one place that's being bombed and destroyed to another place that's being bombed and destroyed. Moved from Al Jazeera and Syria to Damascus. World War II comes, Damascus is bombed. Syria becomes divided under Vichy French and Free French. We move to Aleppo, and Aleppo becomes bombed. And we, children at that time, were happy because when bombs were dropping, school was closed. But I mention, because these are important things that have happened in my life, that have brought me where I am here. Yeah. And also what brought me where I'm here is a photograph that I think is blocked from most of you. It is a photograph of one of the gentlemen here, and his name is Pittman Benjamin Potter. Pittman Benjamin Potter was a professor of international relations. When he heard the year he graduated in 1931 that Haile Selassie is in Geneva looking for people to defend him after the Italians have invaded Ethiopia, volunteered to defend Haile Selassie. Yeah, that's where we are. So we are stepping on sacred ground. I have been fortunate to sit at the feet of women and men, Marian Irish, Mary Eloise Bradshaw, and also many others. Sam Sharp, who survived Poland, survived the Holocaust, escaped to Paris, had to escape from Paris when they came to Paris, as he would remind us, and went from one place to another and ended up here. And I was also sitting at his feet as one of his teaching assistants. So one day he comes, he said, Aziz, I said, yes. He said, McCarthy people have invited me to go
and spend the day with them tomorrow. This was the Un-American Activities Committee. I don't know if I'll be back for election or not. These are my lecture notes. Yes, yeah, that's right. So this is when I'm asked what brought me here. Yeah, these are the memories, and I see Gary. Yeah, Gary is here too. Now, some of them are also professors. Gary, going back, could you mention some of? Yeah. So I mentioned Sharp, I mentioned Charles Lurch, Miriam Irish. So let me then go to some of the written notes I have here. Beloved friends, your love and support have given me my standing. That's why I'm here. Love and support. You brought me here today. My dearly beloved American University has given me a marvelous journey. Rich in adventure, traveling with remarkable companions. Many of you are here today. Some of my companions have left us. I mentioned some of their names. Others have retired. But their spirit, like yours, lives in our classrooms. Our beautiful 90 acres and trees remember your footsteps and their footsteps. Our classrooms hear their voices. I stand before you, I sit now before you as alumnus, as witness. American University is sacred ground. I tell students when I meet with them, you are stepping on sacred ground. They said, why sacred ground? Sacred ground that established a law school by women and for women when women were barred from law schools in the United States. Sacred ground because American University refused to provide names of its professors, and I mentioned my professor to Joe McCarthy, like many other great schools did. We did not. I remember I was a student. Sacred ground because American University established safe ground because American University never established quotas limiting Jewish students when many other schools did, and welcomed a national Jewish fraternity to be on our campus. And I'm proud to say I'm a member of Phi Epsilon Pi, which is now ZBT. Sacred ground because the American University School of International Service was one of the first schools to establish a peace and resolution program, which is now one of the premier programs in the United States. When I say that, because it took a great deal, we are here today because back, maybe you'll remind me, Lou, when our students wanted to have a peace program, we didn't have it for many years. So they marched to the faculty meeting. You remember that marching to the faculty meeting? They came to the faculty meeting and demanded that we set a program, and we did. Along the journey, I learned that peace and personal transformation are inseparable. You can't separate peace and personal transformation. When peace emanates from us, peace returns to us, we become peaceful. Peace is cultivated in the human spirit. It is already present in every human heart. It can be tapped and released. Peace is a process. Though some of us recognize the connection between inner and outer peace, few of us are already a Gandhi, a Mother Teresa, a Lao, Krishna, Moses, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad. Peace is a journey. That's what I'm learning. Peace is a journey, not a destination. It's not an end goal, but inherently a process. This process involves endless transformation, detachment, and response. Yes, endless transformation. There is no instant transformation. There are no instant transformers. In the same way that our limitations are inexhaustible, our growth in peace is limitless. So don't be afraid, it's limitless. Each moment when we see and detach from a selfish thought impulse, we deepen our peace by one step. This is how peace is transformative. Yes, peace is a process of detachment and response because peace has to create itself moment by moment in our lives of constant change through detachment and response. This detachment should be obvious with respect to events that punctuate everyday life, as well as the obstacles that oppose conflict resolution. But it also happens in meditation. Meditation starts by detaching the mind from the thoughts and memories of prior action, whether of the day, previous days, or days to come. Detachment is letting go. Yes. In the course that I work with, we begin with meditation. Both types of spiritual action, practice in daily meditation and practice in everyday life, are necessary. This sweating out of our transformation is the only way inner and outer peace can be realized. They have to be, they cannot be realized otherwise. Once peace is touched, as a temporary state, then maintaining that state requires the work of incorporating peace into daily routine. This is another process. It is sweaty work because daily life is a relentless stimulus to our talent. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. To our talent, and a continuous challenge to our peaceful energy. I think it would be easier for me to hold it this way. When spiritual experience, why is spiritual experience required? Spiritual consciousness refers to the direct knowledge we have of the world and ourselves before any thoughts arise in the mind. Because our thoughts carry the essence of self, and because the essence of self is itself a thought, only spiritual consciousness can circumvent the root of conflict. It can do this because it doesn't recognize a distinction between self and other. Without a sense of separation between self and other, only unity remains. If this perspective were to form the basis of peace solutions, any number of specific approaches would be likely to work. This is all it would take to see that social and political peace depends on the experience of inner peace. If we understand what inner peace is a quiet mind. Let me set a formal argument for stillness of thought as a necessary condition for outer social and political peace. Stillness of thought impulses occurs only when we recognize them, when we are conscious of them. The problem is that we are not clearly conscious of the majority of our thoughts. Why? Because constant subconscious thinking means we are identifying with our thoughts. Why? Because identifying with our thoughts means we are investing a sense of self in them. Investing a sense of self in thoughts means we are creating the division between self versus other. The division of self versus other is the germ of violence. Therefore, constant subconscious thinking is the germ of competition and war. Therefore, stillness of thought is necessary condition for peace. The key concept here is the first. Why is investing a sense of self in our thoughts built into subconscious thinking? Because some subconscious thinking means we are not recognizing thoughts as impulses separate from consciousness. Clear recognition of thoughts as transitory impulses means we recognize them as separate from who we are. When we don't recognize our thoughts, impulses as transitory things, we feel identical with them. This is a subconscious sense of self invested in our thoughts. Because our thoughts appear to be a part of our self-identity. Any individual or group who criticizes our beliefs is felt to be criticizing us. We take this personally. We feel threatened or angry because we don't see that our beliefs are just subtle objects within our field of consciousness. They are not who we are. But the other's criticism threatens to destroy our beliefs, so we feel the other is destroying us. In ordinary language, they are shooting us down like flames, blowing us out of the water. These are military metaphors for killing. When human beings do kill each other in war over the ideas of Protestantism, Catholicism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, equality, and democracy, and more. We kill one another. Religion has never brought universal peace. This is true despite its role at different points throughout history as a powerful force for peace and cultural harmony. Confucianism, for instance, helped end the warring states period of ancient China. Christianity helped reunify the decadent Roman Empire, both East and West factions. Rabbinic Judaism blazed up as a force of peace in exilic Babylon. Islam unified the Arab tribes. Buddhism was the basis for instilling peace during Ashoka's empire in the 3rd century BCE. These religious groups pacified and unified broken and belligerent societies, but successor states tended to demand allegiance to their finite forms and methods. Inevitably, this brought a return to conflict and war. Religion and ACE, ACE, when it enters politics, it becomes a pawn. It becomes a pawn in the game among nations and among people. Religion, when twisted and corrupted, leads to exclusivity. It becomes closed. Hence, I talk about closed religion and open religion. Every religion has its closed dimension and open dimension. It becomes closed, driven by fear of differences. Closed religion preaches total ownership of truth, when in reality we all possess parts of the truth and need each other to discover truth's totality. What I continue to discover, truth is scattered all over the place. All over the place. I remember one day at DuPont Circle, a man came to another man who was desperately looking for something in DuPont Circle. It was in the evening. His buddy came around and said, "Jim, let me help you." So I kept helping him, and they couldn't find it. He said, "Jim, what did you lose?" He said, "My keys." He said, "Where did you exactly lose them?" He said, I lost them on Q Street, but there are no lights in Q Street. I am looking for them under the lights. Most of us look for truth under the light. When we stopped identifying with our beliefs because we see them clearly as transitory objects, then we don't take criticism personally. We refrain. What does peace as inner experience mean? As mentioned earlier, inner peace is stillness of thought, impulses. This is also clarity, the basis of wisdom, because thoughts distract consciousness from content with reality. Reality is defined simply as our true love, the way I define it. Reality is love, and love is reality. Here is certainly the connection between peace and transformation. Peace is the expansion of consciousness, because when conscious energy is used up to form desires and prejudices, then awareness is undermined. Then awareness is dimmed. All thought impulses dim awareness of reality, just to make and maintain their own forms. Also, thought impulses prevent direct contact with reality. They are a film or veil between consciousness and the world. Thoughts not based on direct contact with reality are delusive. Special practices remove compulsive thought formations, relentlessly agitating and disturbing our mind. When awareness opens into deep, stable consciousness, transcending the fourth sense of self, born from thought, which is the source of all disturbing emotions, our illusory individuality disappears in God's unboundless wholeness. When the self is transcended, then the resulting energetic but stilled awareness is love, our true nature. All living things on the planet have their ecological function. We humans, love is our ecological function. So the songs and statements about love makes the world go round, and it's true. It is not an abstraction. Love is our ecological function. Yes, yes, it is. When there is no self, there can be no other. Expanded deep consciousness, realize that self and others are delusions created by thought. The insight that we are one is love. The whole universe is one. In the accompanying joy of this love, conflict is recognized as coming from the emotional disturbance of the fourth sense of self. In contrast, actions arising from realization are loving actions that dissolve conflict and suffering. Cooperation replaces competition. This is not utopian. This is a life experience of people who realize their true nature. They do not spend their lives in competition and conflict, but they often live intensely active lives. Gandhi, yes, yes, yes. Eleanor Roosevelt, yes. Abdul Ghaffar Khan, yes. Their wide-ranging work are countless friendship and social contact carried peace. Their acts radiated compassion. That is why millions were open to them as they were to Rabi al-Adawiyya, Abraham, Maimonides. In our area, we can find such mothers to Aung San Suu Kyi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Albert Einstein, to name very, very few. But all humans who experience inner peace spread it to others. You know it. You know it, yeah. I was at the drugstore Friday evening, late afternoon, crowded. There was one cashier, Amy. Amy was the only cashier. Very crowded. Line was getting longer and longer. People were getting impatient, looking at their watches. They kept looking. I was standing behind a lady with a hat. When her turn came, the lady with the hat looks at the cashier. Oh, said, Amy, sweetheart, you must be tired. How long have you been standing on your feet? And she kept engaging her and engaging her and kept engaging her. She changed the whole environment. People, but I said, my husband can wait, my wife can wait. That's okay, yeah. They started talking to one another. One person changed the whole atmosphere, yeah. And I looked for her, and when she left, I followed her, but she disappeared. Till this day, I don't know if I imagined that. It was true, but I knew it was true. But all humans who experience inner peace spread it to others. She spread it to others. That woman did spread it to others. This is a possibility for all of us. Can you believe it? All of us can do it. All of us can be peace spreaders. Peace is the doorway to compassion, and nonviolence is the first step to love. A framework I use for conflict resolution. When I am peace, peace emanates from me, and peace returns to me. That's the formula. That's the peace triangle. The transition of peace as first inner transformation and only then external transformation creates a certain framework in my work. Step one, create safe space. Create safe space. As a facilitator, I try to create a safe space for conflicting parties, because what I see there is almost always a disparity in power. It's difficult to feel safe when you feel powerless. The environment and setting, the idea that are co-participating. Yeah. When you feel powerless, you can't. Because this is an inner as much as an outer peace, it requires emptying unconscious desires. So we have to empty. When I'm connected to that state of grace within myself, it manifests externally as a calming, non-judgmental energy. This clear space invites the parties in conflict to recognize their unconscious baggage so they can stop embracing their pain. So when we want to make peace, we have to let go of the pain, not embrace it. If you want to embrace it, to kill it, but not embrace it to be dominated by it. For this stage, coming from a peace place of lightheartedness and humility is essential. You cannot grapple with these emotions if I'm weighed down by my own. Nelson Mandela, I saw Nelson Mandela in action in South Africa when he was out of prison. A group of us with the leadership of Young Presidents Organization went to celebrate him. And he came late. As he entered late with holding the hands of a young girl. He said, "Margaret, stop me." He said, "Are you Nelson Mandela?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My God, you look too old." That's how he met the group. Only a humble man could share this story with laughter. To collapse the distance between them. Make the answer, collapse the distance, when your tank is off, collapse the distance between them. Yeah. They see themselves separate. I have learned when I work with groups and I begin to work with the group. In my meeting with Turks and Greeks, I address them as my beloved Turks and other Greeks. Then my beloved Greeks and other Turks. Oh, my beloved Jews and other Palestinians. And at the beginning, but after a while, it is them. Because they realize they are caught, that both of them are traumatized. Yes, yeah, yes. This again narrows the disparity of power between them. It allows them to appreciate an understanding that they are equally powerful or equally powerless. They are both. Yeah. And for me, as I shared with you earlier, to do this, I must work on avoiding self-centeredness. Yeah. I remember when a group of us started organizing peace studies on campus, we were not taken seriously. We were called flakes, the flakes on campus. And one of the original flakes is here. Coleman, are you here? Coleman McCarthy. He's the original flake. Yeah, that's right. Yes. Thank you.
You calling me a co-flake?
I will go. But leadership is the ability to stand up in the midst of laughter. They were laughing at us, yes. We paid the price, but in the process discovered a better prize. Both humility and awareness of what separation feels and looks like. That experience of marginalization, coupled with my inner work, collapsed my belief that there is a center and a periphery. Where you are is the center. There is no periphery. Any place you are is the center. That's what you learn. That's what you learn. Yeah. Without this experience, it would not have been able parties. Then build trust or becoming companions on the journey. Yeah. create empathy, become companions on the journey. On the surface is only blame, and then cannot get past this blame until they see each other as fellow sufferers on a journey of pain rather than as the other. They can only see each other this way by recognizing their own state of grace and their own unconscious. Thus, the first step, yeah. Yeah. Another stage, I learned this working with Carl Rogers. Yeah. Carl Rogers. Many of you have read him, may have met him. He passed away, I think, in the 90s. He was the founder of the Center for the Study of the Person. He was at San Diego. He had invited a group of us to work with him in Rust, Austria, and mediating Nicaragua and the United States at that time. Yeah. And we tried and tried, nothing ever worked. Because when the Nicaraguans would take the floor, they would repeat exactly what they had said about the US. When Americans took the floor, they would say the same thing. Until the Austrians invited all of us for the new wine. There was a new wine, wine came out to serve the new wine. And while serving the new wine, the American delegate, yeah, sure, I do, I can see that. The American delegate put his hand in his wallet and produced a picture of his son. He looked at the Nicaraguan delegate. He said, I don't you to kill my son. And it so happened the Nicaraguan also had a photo. He took a photo of his son. He said, this photo of my son. Let's make an agreement. This next vacation, let your son can spend vacation with us, and let my son spend vacation with you. And this is what broke it. Not the discussion about national interest, foreign interest, national security, my son and your son. When it became reduced to you and me, when it became humanized. So let's give peace a human face. Thank you.
I want to congratulate all 5 of my colleagues here on their tremendous scholarship, their tremendous teaching, and their collective commitment to fostering a more just and peaceful world. So I really greatly appreciate all that you've done. I'm curious if I can ask, if any of you, I would like to ask those of you who've taken a class from one or more of the 5 to please stand up. Wow. All right. There they are. Thank you. And I'd like to ask any of the family members to please stand up. Come on. Thank you all for all you've done for the School of International Service. We do have a few minutes before the reception. If there are questions for any of our faculty members, and if you could come to the microphone up here, please invite you to do that. Yes, please. And if you could just briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Betty Sitka. I'm an alum. Professor Saeed, you mentioned the Jewish fraternity, but you didn't mention that you were the first faculty sponsor to get it accepted here at American University. Could you share with us why you made...
What happened, yeah. I had 3 students coming to my office. They heard this new professor here. He has long hair. He must be important. So they said, we are here. I said, what can I do for you? They said, we cannot join the fraternities. I said, why? They said, because we are Jewish. Okay. So said, we need your help. So next to I go to the next faculty meeting. In those days, faculty was not huge, like up the university. We would meet at Hearst Hall, second floor. I stood up and made a motion that fraternities and sororities delete their sectarian religious class by the end of the year. And if they don't, they lose their charter on our campus. Motion did not pass. Then I stood up. I said, the Jewish kids who came to my office, they want to establish Phi Epsilon Pi, a national Jewish fraternity. I was seconded. At the corner, one old professor stands up. He said, what's your name? I said, Said. He said, where are you from? I thought it was Schubert. Professor Schubert said, damn it, it takes an Arab to tell us we should have a Jewish fraternity. That's our story. That's how I became a fraternity.
Very nice.
And I'm proud to say to you, I have a magnificent memories of those days. Yeah. Magnificent memories, yeah. Thank you.
Please.
My name is Barbara Ween, and I want to appreciate all of you for your rich intellectual traditions and contributions. I have a question for Gordon. It's a Gordian knot that I've been trying to cut through ever since you published The Iron Triangle, which is how do we shave off those corners of the Iron Triangle? To go back to Jim's question, what are the most appropriate strategies to reverse the militarization of our foreign policy? I really ask that of all of you, but particularly that interlocking relationship between the Defense Industries Congress and the Pentagon.
Now there's an easy question to answer. A lot of people have been working at trying to answer that question in this country for a very long time. In fact, I wanted to acknowledge three of them in this room because although I'm the relative youngster on this panel in terms of time spent at American University, there are actually three people in the room that I have worked in various ways at that question with for very many years, all of whom I met at almost the same period of time in 3 years. When I got fired from Columbia University and went to the Social Science Research Council, I met a young program director at the Social Science Research Council who was doing the Latin American programs, whose name was Lou Goodman, 1972 when we met. I also met in bars, streets, and various other settings. One of the people on this panel back in the early 1970s, Jim Middleman, whom I've known that long, and probably longest, the person with whom I collaborated for many years as co-founders and editors of a journal called Politics and Society, Phil Brenner, who is, I think, now left, but was sitting back in the back there. So there are people, I think that's part of the answer to your question, Barbara, is you have to spend a very long time at it. There's no one easy answer, and it may not happen in our lifetime, right? But many things have changed since I first started working on that issue. While the intimacy of that decision-making apparatus is still very much with us, it is now engulfed by a lot of other things happening in American society. The military budget no longer dominates the American economy. If it ever did, it certainly doesn't now. And while decisions inside the defense world are very much influenced by that relationship, as frankly they are as a political scientist in a lot of triangular relationships in policy, the reach that we have in a broader set of issues in this country is more significant than that entity. So if I was listening to people talk about what they wish they had done differently or thought about that they might have done differently or whatever, someday I would love to think about, at least, I'm not sure I want to undertake it, rewriting the Iron Triangle to embed it in a broader understanding of the things that lead to the kinds of decisions that we make when we engage the world, and it's not all that triangular relationship. Ending it as a political science question, a lot harder. It's the root of one of the distinctions between the civilian institutions and the military institutions. If you think about it, the State Department lacks a constituency in the United States. There's no particularly embedded set of interests in American society that support the activities and programs of the State Department. Makes it an uphill job. The military serves as a kind of can-do, easy access institution for the White House when it's more difficult to mobilize the State Department and the development agencies in the service of American foreign policy purposes. The Pentagon is a unified institution, the State Department is not. It's a series of institutions across American foreign policy. I mean, this is some of the things that I learned in studying the balance of the institutions. The Foreign Service officers are not strategic planners, budgeters, or organizers. They're wonderful people, and they're great diplomats, but they're not necessarily good managers of purpose and practice in the government. So there's a lot of reasons why it's very hard even to acquire a balance in the toolkit of American statecraft. I think, frankly, one of the answers may well turn out to be that as the global power relationships readjust, which is, I think, very much what is happening today, and as presidents continue to reach for the military instrument to try to cope with that adjustment and fail, the accumulated consequences of that failure may well lead us to take another look and see whether we've got the balance right. But it's not an easy question to answer.
But maybe a small footnote, because relevant, and the man is here, and I was here as a witness. I was in an office of a very, very high official of the university years ago, and heard and participated in a telephone conversation. I did not speak, but I was here with them, telling them that Corporal McCarthy and your faculty does not make it easy for you guys to get DoD grants. And I'm proud to tell you that the high official told them, I'm not listening to this garbage. And Corporal McCarthy stayed on the faculty. And other times, they were after Corporal McCarthy again, and students had to march to the office of another president of the university to keep Corporal McCarthy. That's unfortunately, that's how the Stanfords, the Harvards, the Yales, the Columbians made their money. Because my sons have attended those people. They have lots of money, and a good deal of it comes from DoD, unfortunately.
Coleman's a good McCarthy.
I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank you all. And we have a reception upstairs, so if you have other questions, hold on. If you have questions that you would like to ask, they will be here up in the atrium, and please feel free to come up and ask them about any of the things they've discussed or anything else. And I look forward to continuing our celebration. Thanks to all 5 of you.